All right, last video for the week. This is going to be on chapter 13, section 3. We're going to be looking at the unemployment rate. Some of you have been laughing at my hair. I wish I could get a haircut. I know it's sticking up in the back, but give you something to laugh at. Others of you have said, Mr. Ward, we need to see more leg. Well, there you go. Still wearing shorts, enjoying the warm weather. Okay. The last section is on one of the most important statistics that measures how the economy is doing, the one that's in the news all the time these days because of the pandemic, and that's the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is another way of measuring how the economy is doing. Obviously, we want the unemployment rate to be as low as possible, and unfortunately it is climbing and climbing rapidly during this pandemic. Okay. We're going to try to go as quickly through it as we can. The unemployment rate is a formula to calculate the unemployment rate, just like we had a formula or a way of looking at inflation. The formula for calculating the unemployment rate is to take the number of unemployed workers and divide it by the civilian labor force. Okay? The civilian labor force is defined by this. First of all, civilian means not in the military. So anybody that works in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, we thank them for their service, but they're not considered part of the civilian labor force. So those millions of American men and women are not included. Okay? So we don't, civilian meaning not in the military. Also, in order to be part of the labor force, you have to be at least 16 years of age or older. Okay? My grandson is 12. He doesn't have a job, but he's also not part of the civilian labor force because he's not old enough. Okay? And the last part of the civilian labor force, you have to be at least 16 years of age or older, you have to be not in the military, and you have to have a job or be actively looking for a job. Okay? So some of you are not part of the labor force. Even though you're not in the military, even though you're 16 years of age or older, you're not looking for a job, therefore you're not part of the labor force. Okay? Could also be my mom, who's retired. But even when I was growing up, when I was younger, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And so she did not look for a job. She had plenty of work to do raising the children, but because she was not looking for a job, she was not part of the labor force. So in order to be part of the labor force, you have to be 16 years of age or older, not in the military, and you have to be already working or looking for work. So those people that are not looking because they're a housewife, because they're want to focus on school, or because they have a rich husband or wife, whatever the case might be, if they're not looking for a job, they're not part of the labor force. So what then is an unemployed person? An unemployed person is someone who is looking for work, actively looking for work, and unable to find a job. Okay? Simply saying, I don't have a job does not make you unemployed. Okay? My mom doesn't have a job, but she's not looking for a job. Okay, she's 80 years old. She doesn't need to look for a job. Okay, so in order to be considered unemployed, it's not hashtag unemployed. The number of unemployed, okay, is persons that are looking for work and unable to find it. Okay? Now, every month, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does a survey. They use a phone and they call households and they ask the people in that household, how many people do you have that are 16 years of age or older, not in the military, actively looking for work, or already having a job. So they can calculate the civilian labor force. Last month, about 163 million people, 163 million people made up the civilian labor force. They were 16 years of age or older, not in the military, looking for work. And last month, they did the survey, the last numbers that came out were in March, okay? Or from March. So they came out April 3rd, and they were for data through about March 15th. And if you remember right, that was just the very, very beginning of the economic shutdown. So the numbers were not so bad. There were approximately 7.14 million unemployed workers. That works out to an unemployment rate of 4.4%. That was in March. Okay? The data came out in April, so the middle of March they did the survey, they did all the calculations, and on April 3rd, they came out with these numbers. 4.4% is very good, okay? The unemployment rate in February was closer to 4%. Again, excellent. In fact, among the lowest unemployment rates we've ever had, okay? But as people began to lose their jobs, even at the beginning and middle of March, it started to tick upward, okay? When the numbers come out in May, it's going to be astronomically higher, okay? The most recent statistics that I read said there have been an increase in almost 26 million Americans filing unemployment claims. So 26 million added to that. So 26 million, not technically some of those people could have gotten a job during the pandemic. I know some of the supermarkets are hiring, some of the food delivery services are hiring and so forth. So maybe some of these people got a job. But if you add 26 million people to that, that will drive the unemployment rate over 20%. And in fact, some of the economists are predicting that the unemployment rate could reach well over 20%, as much as 23, 24, 25%. During the Great Depression, the highest unemployment rate recorded was 25%. And so this pandemic could drive the unemployment rate to the highest it's ever been. Okay? Now, hopefully, those will be a short-term unemployment figures, so that each month when the economy starts to reopen and people are able to go back and get their jobs, then that unemployment rate will come back down. But right now, some economists are predicting as high as 25%. And that's crazy. That's Great Depression numbers. Okay? So the unemployment rate is a statistic that is calculated every single month. And they take the number of unemployed and they divide it by the civilian labor force. They do that by doing a monthly survey, a phone survey, and they contacted a bunch of families, a bunch of households last month, 163 million people in the labor force, 7.14 million unemployed for an unemployment rate of 4.4%. The unemployment rate is one of the most widely watched statistics. But as we learned before, statistics are never perfect. They don't ever tell the whole story, okay? And the unemployment rate does not tell the whole story either. Okay? We call these forms of underemployment or underreported employment situations. The first group that is not going to show up in the unemployment statistic are what we call discouraged workers. A discouraged worker is someone that has become so discouraged that they stop looking for work altogether. For example, that homeless person that you might see at the end of a freeway off-ramp, okay? They're not looking for work. In all likelihood, they're not looking for work, and so since they've stopped looking, they're no longer considered unemployed because they've stopped looking. They've become so frustrated, so discouraged that they think no one will ever hire them because they're homeless or whatever the case might be. But the minute they stop looking, they're no longer unemployed. Okay? During a typical recession, that number could be about 1 million people. So again, add another 1 million people to that unemployed number. Because if you ask these people, do you want a job? They would certainly say yes, but they're not looking. And the minute they stop looking, they're no longer unemployed. The other group that does not show up is someone who's seen their hours cut. Maybe you were a full-time worker, and because of the recession, or in this case, the pandemic-induced recession, they cut your hours down to 10 or 15 hours a week. So instead of working 40 hours, you're working 10, 15, 20 hours a week. Is your family going to be experiencing financial hardship? Absolutely. But because you're working at least 1 hour, as long as you're working at least 1 hour a week, you're not considered unemployed. To be considered unemployed, you can't be working at all. Well, during a recession, obviously some people lose their job altogether, but a lot of other workers see their hours cut and cut significantly. And that does cause financial hardship, okay? But it does not include the part-time workers. If we were doing this lesson in class, I would call up on the smartboard the most recent statistics, and you would see a large number of part-time workers that are looking for full-time work, but all they can do is find part-time work. They're not technically unemployed, but they certainly are not fully employed as well. Okay? The last one that's actually not in the book, another form of underemployment, would be someone who's working below their job skills. If I lost my job as a teacher, but I was able to get a job making pizzas at Domino's, I would not be considered unemployed because I have a job. But not a lot of the pizza makers at Domino's have a master's degree and so forth. I would be working below my skill set. That's another form of underemployment. But because I'd have a job making pizzas, I would not technically be unemployed. So even though this number is rising, it still doesn't tell the whole story. And of course, during this pandemic, we're going to see even greater causes or greater amounts of employment-related problems. Okay? So to be unemployed means that you're looking for work and you don't have a job. Okay? There are different types of unemployment. Okay? There are 5 basic types of unemployment. The first one is frictional. Frictional unemployment is workers that are between jobs. For example, I paint houses. Okay? I am finishing the first house that I'm painting, and now I'm going to start looking for another house to paint. That job might not come around for a week or 2. If they happen to call during that time, I'm looking for a job, and I don't have one, then I would technically be unemployed because I finished one job and I haven't been able to find the other one. Okay? That's said to be frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment is a type of temporary unemployment because your job is coming back. Okay? The next one that I want to talk about, skipping over a little bit from the book, is cyclical unemployment. With cyclical unemployment, you're unemployed because of the business cycle. We learned earlier that the economy goes through ups and downs and ups and downs. The downs being a recession. Are a lot of Americans today becoming cyclically unemployed? Of course, they're being laid off. Okay, the airline industry is being terribly hard hit. The restaurants, the bars, the hotels are being terribly hard hit. Those workers are being laid off because people aren't going to those establishments. They're not open or whatever. Okay? And as a result, those people have lost their job. But when the economy gets better and the economy starts to open up again and it starts into an expansion, they're going to get rehired. Okay? That's a form of unemployment, and it's not fun, but at least it's temporary. Eventually the job will come back. And we're all rooting for this pandemic-induced recession to be very short. Okay? The last type of temporary unemployment is seasonal unemployment. With seasonal unemployment, it's when you're unemployed because it's the wrong time of the year. If you're a Raging Waters worker, you're working during the summer, but during the winter you don't have a job because Raging Waters isn't open. If you're a construction worker in the Northeast where it snows a lot, what happens during the winter months? You're not able to work, so you'd be seasonally unemployed. These 3 types of unemployment are considered temporary because your job will eventually come back. When the economy gets better, when the time of year changes, when your next job pops up. Okay? The last 2 types of unemployment are much more serious because your job is never coming back. Okay? These are permanent forms of unemployment. And the most important one is structural unemployment. If you are structurally unemployed, it's because your job skills are no longer necessary. There's been a fundamental a change in the way we do things so that your job skills are no longer necessary. When I first started teaching at Charter Oak High School long ago, I taught typing on a typewriter. Okay? It was a long time ago. We actually used typewriters. And I taught people how to type. ASDF, JKL, semicolon. Okay? And we would I taught them how to learn to type on a typewriter. And every week we had a typewriter repairman who would come in on Friday afternoons and he would repair the typewriters, fix the keys, replace the ribbons, and so forth. Well, what happened to that guy? He lost his job. As we got away from using typewriters and started using computers, his job skills were no longer necessary. We no longer need someone to fix typewriters because we don't use typewriters anymore. Is his job ever coming back? No. Structural unemployment is much more permanent. That's why it's more serious. Similar to structural, but a little bit different, is technological unemployment. with technological unemployment, your job skills are still necessary, but now they're being done by a machine. When I was your age, we didn't have the technological advancements that we have. So if you wanted to do banking, you had to go inside the bank and talk to a real live human being like a bank, named a bank teller. And you'd go in during banking hours, 9 to 4:30, Monday through Friday, and occasionally they were open on Saturday mornings. But you'd have to talk to a real live human. Well, now we have so much technology. You can cash checks on your phone. You can get money out of the bank at an ATM. You can send payments through Zelle and Venmo. You can have direct deposit. What's happened to the number of tellers? It's gone way down. Okay? We still need someone or something to make deposits and withdrawals, but now the someone is usually a something. That's another form of permanent unemployment. It's not like we're going to go back and start using a lot more tellers again. Okay? So those are your 5 types of unemployment. Whether you're frictionally unemployed, seasonally unemployed, or cyclically unemployed, those are temporary, but they're still no less fun because you're out of work, and you're not going to be able to earn money to support your family. Okay? Structural unemployment, technological unemployment, much more serious. You're going to have to get new job skills. That gentleman that lost his job as a typewriter repairman, he had to learn new skills. Maybe he learned how to fix computers. Maybe he learned how to become a plumber. Maybe he became a barber. But he had to get new skills in order to get a job. Okay? So those are your 5 types of unemployment. Okay? The last section, last part of this section, talks about a couple of unofficial statistics that try to measure how the economy is doing. One is called the GDP gap. GDP gap would be the gap between what the economy could be producing. If all of our land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship were being fully utilized, our GDP would, say, be $25 trillion worth of stuff. But now, because we have the recession, our GDP might fall to $18 trillion. So we're $7 trillion short of what we could be doing. That's the GDP gap. That one's not actually looked at. The other one is the misery index. The misery index is an unofficial statistic that adds the rate of inflation and the unemployment rate. Last month, the rate of inflation was about 2%. The unemployment rate was 4.4%. That sums to 6.4%. To give you a perspective, as bad as that is, and unfortunately it's going to get significantly worse, when I was a high school senior, the rate of inflation was 12%, and the unemployment rate was around 11%. So our misery index was 23%, much worse than you have it right now. Obviously, with the unemployment rate about to soar, you're going to find that your economic conditions are worse than what mine were. But these are, if you look in the book, historically bad. Most of the time, we have misery indexes in the 6, 7, 8, 9%, maybe 10%. But unfortunately, it's going to get a lot worse. Okay? So there you have probably the most looked at statistic these days, and that's the unemployment rate. And it's going to continue to get worse. It's important that you know what goes into the unemployment rate. It's not simply people without a job. They have to be looking for a job. In order to be part of the labor force, you can't be in the military. You have to be at least 16 years of age or older, and you have to be looking for a job. Okay? Next week or the week after, when those numbers come out, I'll come back to this and we'll take a look at just how bad the unemployment rate is as calculated by the middle of April. And again, it's going to continue to get worse, but my hopes are that this recession will end as quickly as possible. The unemployment rate will go way up for a while and then start to come back down fairly quickly. All right, when you go to take the quiz this week, okay, as you remember from reading the email, you need to do well on the quiz if you want to try to improve your grade. All of the answers are in the textbook. Take the time to look up the answers in the textbook so that you can do well on the quiz and potentially raise your grade in my class. Until we talk to each other again next week, enjoy the warm weather. Please continue to practice social distancing and be as safe as you can so we can reduce the curve and we can get this economy moving back in the correct direction.